Welcome to Big Blend Radio's art show featuring Victoria Chick, a contemporary figurative artist and early 19th and 20th century print collector. Hey everyone, welcome back to Big Blend Radio's World of Art show with artist Victoria Chick. You can learn more about Victoria, obviously on her website, victoriachick.com. She is an early 19th and 20th century print collector, a contemporary figurative artist, and she's based out in Silver City, which is in the southwest corner of New Mexico. And it is a gorgeous time of year to get out that way. Spring is spectacular in Silver City. And Silver City, a lot of people go for nature, Gila cliff dwellings, the Gila River, all of that, a Gila forest, but it's also an art community. So Victoria is the spearhead behind a fine art museum actually going into Silver City, that general region, and serving the southwest of New Mexico. It's called the Southwest Regional Museum of Art and Art Center. You can go to southwest-art-museum.org. But in all of this, she's been doing some speaking engagements on the value of art museums and fine museums, like real proper museums, right? In a community, how that boosts the region economically and also through tourism. And so she dug into the history of museums. So last month we talked about the history of museums around the world, literally. And hey, there was a princess with her own museum. She's super cool. So I've got that linked in the episode notes and also linked to an article on what is now part 2, which is the history of art museums in America. And I think this is one of the longest introductions I've ever done for Victoria. But welcome back, Victoria. How are you?
Thank you, Lisa. I'm glad to be back. I thought we were long last time, when we talked about part 1 of museums, but here we are again with part 2. I think it's really interesting what happened in the first part of the American experience here. There were 3 museums, competing for the title of the first museum. And I don't think they knew about each other at the time, because communication wasn't as great as it is now. But one of the museums of the 3 is the Wadsworth Athenaeum, and that is Athenaeum is a place for study. It started out strictly as an art museum, but Mr. Wadsworth listened to his friends who felt it should be more than an art museum or just an art museum. And so in 1844, these people got together. Wadsworth, there was other people involved, and he was really the art collector. That's why he wanted it to be a museum. And he especially liked the artists that were along the Hudson River. It was called the Hudson River School. Their paintings formed the core of his original Athenaeum. And but his friends persuaded him that it needed to be more than a museum, and so he included a library. He included some things in natural history, and the whole reason for having this edifice was for public education. So his I'll call it his castle. It looked like a castle. It was very different from other art museums in the past that were in Europe, and it was very different from museums that kind of proceeded from that point in time in America. So it's very unique. It looked like it had crenellations like a castle on the top, so like you could put guards up on the top. So
in fact, their logo is like a little castle, a little red castle.
Yeah, exactly. It's almost a kind of an icon in appearance. But I think it's interesting. One of the other people that lived in was located in Hartford, Connecticut. Which we don't really think of as a hotbed of art activity, but it was. I think it's always interesting to note that the first museums in America were not in New York City. where I would have expected them to be, because those were where the largest ones are now. But among the other people that helped him with the Athenaeum was the widow of the man who made Colt firearms, Samuel Colt.
Oh wow, Samuel Colt,
yeah. And then there was a financier, John Pierpont Morgan, who helped develop the Athenaeum. So there were other people involved. So, but then the second museum that claims to be the first was in Philadelphia, and it happened. Do you remember we talked about the black lady who was a sculptor? And she lived in Rome. She came back. Yes, Edmonia Lewis. Yes, she came back to the United States to participate in the Centennial Exhibition, and that's how the Philadelphia Museum got started, at the Centennial Exhibition in 1876. And because it was kind of like a World's Fair situation where the other countries were invited. And as part of the fair's permanent buildings on the ground was an art museum, but they didn't call it an art museum. They called it the Pennsylvania Museum and School of Industrial Art. So it was more like design and machining. So anyway, when the Centennial Exhibition was all over, the building was still standing, and they just decided just to keep going with it. So it never got torn down. It became the home. It was a very attractive building. It became the home of the Philadelphia Museum of Art.
Cool.
Which I think
I love that.
Yeah. So, and it still had, when it started, still had all the stuff, decorative art and stuff. But in the 1930s, people were giving it great numbers of paintings. So by the 1930s, it really was an art museum completely.
No, I also love this. I was going to say the Corcoran Gallery to me and everyone. This article again is linked in the episode notes. This story is truly incredible. Like, I had no idea about any of this at all. I love this. I mean, we could be doing art museums for years.
I honestly didn't have any idea about a great number of these things that I wrote about. And if you notice, I'm not the author. I'm just compiling stuff, because there's so many things that are really interesting about this that that are fascinating and funny and kind of sad at the same time. You mentioned the Corcoran. So it started in 1874, and that was the first American art museum that was given totally by one person, which I think is so cool.
Wow.
William Wilson Corcoran was a collector. By I don't know how, by trade he was a banker, but I think his life was absorbed in collecting art more than banking. He loved collecting, and he loved sharing, and he would open his home to like several times a week so people could come in and see the art. I mean, it wasn't just his friends. He was inviting anybody to come in and see his art. And finally, by the 1850s, his home got so overflowing with art that he hired an architect whose name was James Renwick Jr. to build a gallery for him. And this was located across from where the White House is now. It's kind of hard to think of that, because if you've been to Washington D.C., you know how crowded it is. But before the building was finished, the Civil War broke out, and Corcoran moved to Paris while the war was going on. But I think what's interesting is before he left, his bank was kind of unique in that it served everybody. And it sounds odd to us now, because it should be so, it's so normal for everybody to be able to go and do anything. But apparently, free African Americans banked there. Now, and these were people in the North
Mm-hmm.
if we can consider Washington D.C. in the north. So, and this bank, had a lot of black, free
Mm-hmm.
black customers. It was very uncommon at the time because it was a white-owned bank, including Mr.
That is, yeah.
Mr. Corcoran. And Mr. Corcoran, he was a Southern sympathizer because I think that's where he lived when he was growing up. But he owned slaves, so it was a complete opposite to what his bank represented. So he finally supported emancipation, and he freed his own slaves, and then he started buying the freedom of others before the Civil War began. So and then he went to Paris. So his gallery was now about half finished at this time, and it got taken over as a supply depot by the army.
Oh, wow.
Anyway, after the building finally got completed after the war was over, but Corcoran died a year later. So he was his building was and he had trustees. So they saw that the gallery opened, and it opened in 1894. It was crowded so fast, so they wound up moving 2 times. And the last time, he had a different architects, and they built this much fancier building, and they included with it a school of art, and so that was where he was going next. So he had left instructions. Anyway, it's kind of a long story, but
he did. I mean, that's amazing then to move it, right? Because, and this is in D.C., everybody, Washington, D.C. So it's interesting because when you think about, the South too. I mean, I always forget that, Maryland is part of the South. I always forget that until you're up there.
Right.
Then they'll remind you. But DC is considered the South, right? Because it's just wild to me that it is. I just have I have my own geography, everybody. And Nancy and I travel full time, and I'm the driver. Now you know why we go in circles around the country, literally. But this, so anyway, I love this story.
Yeah, well, we're getting. I think now I'm coming to the interesting part. I think because the original gallery that Renwick built, okay, that was. It was not big enough very quickly, so it became other things. Well, it turned into the federal government used it for a claims court, and then they did that for a long time. As the time went on, it was disintegrating because nobody was really taking care of it. So by the 1850s, it had deteriorated so much that they were going to demolish it because it was dangerous. So a little before they did that, and this sounds like it jumps forward really in time, but the first lady at the time was Jacqueline Kennedy. So it was not, from our standpoint, it wasn't that long ago. Anyway, she intervened to make sure it got preserved as a historic building.
She rocks. Yeah.
And I think it's weird, so weird, because it's like I wrote this down because it struck me that the importance of an art museum itself is greater than the life of its founder. So I look at Mr. Corcoran as kind of a poor guy. He funded the original museum, and he gave all the art in it. And he never got any lasting recognition for doing that. And his property and art got sold. Some of it went to other museums. Anyway, he just never got the credit I think he deserves at the time he was doing this so early in the country.
Because now it's part of the Smithsonian, right? The museum.
Well, yes, and
part of it anyway.
It is part. It's part of the American Art Museum of the Smithsonian. It's a little building away from the big building.
Okay, I have a question to ask you about when you talk about it's an American art museum, because like you're the Museum of the Southwest, which is representing Southwest New Mexico, because there's so many tiny, tiny unincorporated communities in this area, and it's rogue land, man. It's the Wild West out there. It really is. It's it's out there in the boonies, and that's New Mexico scrub out there, and it's gorgeous, and there's forests and everything, but it's remote. And so I think what's so great, what you're doing is you're creating something for people locally. But my question is this: it's an American art museum, the Smithsonian. So when in art terminology, where are we about it being American? Does that mean it was made by Americans, or it portrays American? Because like in New Mexico, Santa Fe in the state capitol building, it was all New Mexican artists, had to be from New Mexico.
Right.
And I think they really did showcase New Mexico in their paintings, as I recall, all of them in some way, or a piece of art, depending on what they were doing. So, it was like both from what I recall, because with that being a state building, but yeah, because it could be, I mean, you could be from somewhere else doing a painting of America and even specializing it.
Oh gosh. Well, when
is
we
this
talk
a different show? No, sorry.
Well,
I mean, how do people come up with these names? What makes you the American, museum, art museum?
Are you talking about
The Smithsonian?
Or are you talking about
the Smithsonian. Yeah, what makes like the Smithsonian become like American?
Okay, let me answer the question. It was in America. All the Smithsonian museums, which were, by the way, first museum was given by a guy from England, but every museum is designated something else. They're all in America. I mean, they're all American museums, but their content isn't necessarily only America.
Okay.
It's designated different ways. So, the museum that we're working on here in Silver City we've restricted the contents to be art done by Americans or people who have come to America to do the art.
Okay.
So it has to be a connection as being in America.
Okay.
It could be done in America before the United States was the United States.
That's true too. Yeah. And so that's why you have boards too and guilds to look at these kinds of things and make those decisions, right?
And usually museums will have a distinctive type of collecting, and because they can't take everything, and because it winds up in their basement, stuff that somebody else might find really interesting never gets seen because it's donated to the wrong museum.
Ooh.
Anyway, also all museums are unable to be big enough to collect everything. There's the Brooklyn Museum, for example, is a really big museum. It's what I call a universal collection. In other words, they have lots of different categories within that museum. Different countries are representative, different times of different periods of time, different locations where they've collected things, and not all of it is art. It's more of a general kind of collecting idea.
Okay. Wow.
But anyway.
No, I know it's a lot because when you think about it, that's why you need to have a group, a juried group, an expert group of people to make curating decisions. It's an important part of being a library. So
and every museum has a committee that decides whether they will accept something. Just because somebody wants to give it doesn't mean it will be accepted in that particular museum. So
Yeah.
they have it's because what is very valuable to an individual may not be seen by gift committee as something that will enhance their museum. It might enhance another museum who collects that sort of thing, but museums have to kind of discriminate. That doesn't sound very nice.
No, it's not. Yeah, it's about targeting your market. Let's put it that way. It is. Well, it is. Well, it is looking at, like, you can't do the Museum of the World in 1 square inch. You know what I mean? So it's about space,
yeah, right.
and so defining, okay, this is our parameters of what we are doing, and this is why we're doing that, and this is why, some places have, a mass focus and some don't. A community library, not library, museum, well, if it's, things passed down from, maybe it's an agricultural community and things are passed down, so what a butter churn looks like. They do exist, everybody.
Right.
You have that, and you may have some painting from grandma, great grandma, sitting in there that you go, oh my gosh, that was stolen, grandma. Did you know? That's happened, right, Victoria?
Yeah.
So, you never know what's in there.
Right. Yes. You do have to think about these things. Sometimes people will want to give you something and it is not theirs to give. Mm-hmm. So you have to be very careful. There has to be a lot of documentation, actual facts.
Yeah, and then also being able to actually store everything in a cool, dry place, literally, right? Yeah. That is a true thing. I know it's a good song, but
that happened to me just recently. I was contacted by a woman who was the executor for an estate, and she wanted to know if the museum that we're doing would be interested. Well, we were very interested. However, storage space at this point, since we don't have a building yet, we just didn't feel like that we would have a building in the time that she wanted. So I had to write her and explain that. And also, I gave her other choices. If she wanted to wait, we would love to have her stuff. Mm-hmm. But if she didn't feel that she could wait, I gave her some options of other museums that would probably be interested in what she had to give away. So, and I think any museum would probably, if they were unsure, would give someone an option. If they didn't. Well, so
yeah, it's give people an option of what you can do. And it's interesting, like the museum being really specialized. DeGrazia, we always talk about DeGrazia Gallery in the Sun in Tucson. That's his own museum. He created his own museum, but he has visiting artists. He has rotating exhibits, because you can't keep the same. He's got so much art that they still hold, so they rotate it all the time. So that keeps the interest going. There's always another story. I don't care how long we cover that. That dude did some interesting stuff, art-wise and just as a human, But I find it's so niche. That's who it is. So, what that art is, and yet their phone and email are busy all day long with people going, I have an original DeGrazia, and Lance going, all right, let's see. Let's place the bet, because a lot of times he was the most reproduced artist in the world. It's not the original, but they do have originals on consignment and things like that, and they do occasionally sell one to have the funding for this operation. So it can really go in different ways, and that's why I think when you go to a museum, it's really great to kind of look at the roots of this museum. Who started it? Are they continuing, even as a visitor or an investor into it, are they maintaining their integrity, right? Of what their vision was, and maybe the vision had to change too. That's what we've seen a lot of museums have to do, is shift up a little bit, just even in how they tell the stories of the art,
Yeah, right. Yeah.
That's next month. I'm getting ahead. But let's go back. Let's go back to the Smithsonian,
Well,
because you in your
well,
article you're saying this was also a castle. Just what's going on
well,
with
that's
castles?
what it was. That's what it was nicknamed. I don't think it looks as much like a castle as Mr. Wadsworth Athenaeum, but I didn't go into a lot of detail on the Smithsonian, just because it's like it's a universal museum. I mean, it's got right now. It's got a million buildings, everywhere, all around the mall. Well, I'm exaggerating. It's not a million, but there's a lot of buildings that are associated with the Smithsonian, and so I didn't give a lot of
Everyone
space to that.
knows.
But
Yeah.
the big thing is the Metropolitan Museum of Art. The big thing to me, because it was a turning point in museum building in the United States. And I think the most interesting thing about it is that it was formulated in Paris, because a bunch of New Yorkers went to France to see what was there at the Louvre, and they were so blown away with the Louvre that they discussed building a museum like it, something that would really compare in New York. And so it took them a while, but they were very wealthy people. Okay, this helped. And what they envisioned was they wanted a national institution and gallery of art, and their reason was to bring art and art education into America. This is what every museum wants to do. Art education is a big part of it. So that was their basically sort of I don't know if they wrote it down, but it was their more or less a mission statement. So anyway, they came as soon as they got back to New York. They began contacting everybody they knew to contribute monetarily, and possibly with artwork to the museum. So they formulated themselves actually in 1870, which was about the time some of these other museums were working. And they began starting by purchasing works of art because they had this, everybody chipped in, and they had a lot of money. They didn't have a building yet. This sounds familiar to me. And so they were buying stuff and storing it. And so it took them about 10 years, and then the museum opened to the public, right where it is now. They designed their first building was Victorian Gothic in structure, in style. And there's still a little bit of it you can see, but it expanded so greatly and had so many additions that you cannot hardly see the first building. Everything has been covered up with other buildings. So inside there's some strange areas in the Metropolitan. But
I love
anyway,
that. But this is also part of, or that's the Museum of Modern Art. That's the white one, right? Because the other one's got, like what you're talking about, all these different pieces of architecture going together. You go to some cities like Visalia, California, one of the most fascinating cities downtown to go to, because it was, it was a dusty, ranching, cattle, ag town, and then it grew, became the county seat. They had Black Bart, the pirate, go through, and and then like it was the first talking theater. Fox Theater came in. There was a big deal about, the audiences being, it's just outside Bakersfield area. And it's just this history of that time frame. World War II was massive out there. Half the farmers out there still have watch out towers in their farm from during World War II. And you're going, what? We're in California, with oranges and grapes for wine. Like, what you talking about? They're like, no, that's what happened. So it's like this history is really Americana in a way that people forget because you see the modern day. But when you go in the downtown area of Visalia, you will see there is no such thing as things matching up. No, things that they've even moved buildings where they're like slanted in between each other. Like it's weird. And
Yeah.
then you'll have,
Yeah.
different eras represented of when money came to town, when agriculture started to be really big. People would start moving into town with some opulence, and there were some opulent hotels in that area, a really fancy jail, so, but then you'll turn
Right.
around and you'll have like a Greek architectural thing going on just because somebody's like, look
Yeah.
at me. So it's similar to me from what you're saying for the Metropolitan with that, with how
Right.
they've changed
Yeah.
it over
If
the
you if
years.
you if you if you go to New York now and you look at the Metropolitan, the front of it has the front of it is still the front of it. It was one of the first things to change, but there's been so much stuff added to, so many buildings added, so many annexes added to the museum, Metropolitan
Mm.
Museum, that you really hardly can see the original building at all. It's just covered over, but that's like I don't know if that's the important thing, but the
It's
the
interesting.
style, they got away from the Victorian look, and they went back to the classics. Okay,
Mm.
so they went back to classical pediments and columns and stuff like that. So when it finally opened, with this last edition, that was classical, they had this giant opening, and it was so well written about that it inspired other states, other big cities, to want their own museums, and
Mm.
they used the appearance of the Metropolitan Museum as their model, and that's what changed everything around the world, around the United States. If you go to Cleveland or St. Louis or Kansas City, Detroit, even Boston, Chicago, and even Denver, and even later on, probably you would go to San Francisco, and you even see an example where they started to use classical elements again, just like they did in Europe.
Huh.
In the 15th and 16th and 17th, and then continued in the 18th century. So that kind of architecture was what was in everybody's mind as important architecture. It's something that is impressive, and
Mm.
because all these new things were big, really big, that from about the 1900, well, actually a little bit earlier than that, until 1950, museums that were in large cities, like I mentioned, they were all in this style, and
Mm.
everybody had ionic columns. They would try to find a site that was an impressive site, so maybe something even on a hill. They're interesting, because of they're going back so far in time for their ideas. They would have these giant staircases up to the front door. Well, those giant staircases completely eliminated a lot of people from
Yeah,
going to a
really.
museum, because
Yeah.
they didn't talk about ADA requirements way back then. So
No.
since that time, a lot of those museums have altered their entrances to accommodate ADA requirements.
That's
So anyway, it's
interesting.
interesting. And I think another interesting thing, because this is taking place in the first half of the 20th century, not that long ago, that at the same time there were a few people would have considered them strange, not with the times, certainly. people that were farsighted, that were creative, and that wanted to try something new, that had a different idea about how art should be exhibited. And one of the first person to do that, well, there's three ladies actually that came up with this idea. And that was for the Museum of Modern Art, because modern art was very, very popular in Europe, but it hadn't caught on in the United States yet. So they wanted to have a museum that had only modern art in it. And they wound up doing that. They wanted to have the art be the important thing, not the building. So you were using modern architecture to display modern art. So their galleries were within what we might say, if we looked at it from the outside, they were just business buildings. They were very plain. They were steel girders, sometimes using glass clad walls, and several. They were probably like 5 or 10 stories high, or maybe even when they started out, they rented space. They might have rented a couple of upper floors to show the art. So they just wanted their art to be exhibited without architecture that was distracting or color that was distracting. And when you mentioned the white walls, white museums, this was when people started, they were mocking them really because their walls were all white inside. And this is very different from normal museum interiors.
Mm-hmm. I actually think that the white walls, the white museums and the white walls and everything, I think back to John Lennon and the Beatles and the White Album, and I thought, I wonder if they took any inspiration or mockery from, the white museums. You know what I mean? Because
possibly. Possibly.
It was a little later,
I'm not familiar
but not that
with the
far.
album. Yeah.
Yeah, the White Album is a very iconic, white.
There's about a 60-year difference.
It's a biggie. Yeah. It's a biggie for the Beatles. It's one of their biggie ones come out, a double album, and I used to have it, but I don't, anymore because we travel. But what's also interesting, then I was just thinking through this whole thing. So you have the White Album, and maybe they were just, because I always wondered about that, and there's going to be an answer to it. But then when we look at John Lennon, with John Lennon playing Imagine. And the recording he did, it was one of his last recordings. He did Imagine. It was, the white piano, white walls. I think there was some artwork out there, white baby grand kind of thing. And it was like white wall museum. And it was, to me, I remember watching that as a kid going, why is everything so white? What's going on?
Yeah.
And you've got to think about David Bowie and all these, the Guggenheim and all of those were iconic throughout what happened from the 50s down. Changed, and rock and roll changed with what was going on at the Modern Art Museum, the Museum of Modern Art. What was going on there, and rock and roll and rock music and glam rock that was coming out were connected in a very interesting way. So I wonder about that with the Beatles. I don't know. Just a thought.
I don't know, because I never heard the Beatles album, the White Album. I never heard a song from it that I know of. Because I didn't follow music at all. And so, I appreciated when I heard them, but I didn't know where it was coming from. I didn't know how it was categorized.
Sure.
So I don't know. That's you've got an interesting idea. What they did with, I don't, with the, as far as the Museum of Modern Art did, who was the first, and that was, almost 1930 when they started their Museum of Modern Art, which is kind of a long time ago. But
it's
they were just
they lightened things up because it was the word modern. I always think that it's like modern music of today.
Yeah, but they never said that was their reason. What they said their reason was to have nothing distracting from the art, which sort of.
I know, I understand that with the white, but I'm thinking the actual being a museum of modern art. Like this is current, because sometimes when you say, hey, let's go to a museum, someone will look at you. I don't want to go to a stuffy, dark place. You know what I mean? That's but museums
I
are
never
not
do
like that
that.
whatsoever. I know, I don't either, but there are, but something changed with this museum, I think, in pop culture as a whole, because it was
Yeah.
more current, and it introduced other creatives and inspired musicians to become artists. This
Right.
museum was part of that. It was just part of a creative renaissance in that region as well. And so there were people that famously went there and then also famously at the end of their life exhibited, which is amazing. And some of this happened in other museums in London, but some of these art museums, when you look at some of music history, is very connected. That's a whole other show. I'll write that
Yeah.
one.
Well,
I'll do that one.
part, yeah. Creativity is part of something that artists tend to feel or embrace before a lot of other people are ready for it. So there's a I don't know well, I don't know. Anyway, I know that the MoMA was really an important. It didn't exactly change everybody into making their museums now look like commercial establishments, but it was this point where the change opened people up to other changes, and it took there was 27 years difference between the Museum of Modern Art and the Guggenheim Museum. I always think of Guggenheim being really avant-garde, and it sort of was, but it wasn't very long ago. It was only 1956, so that the Guggenheim was established, and Frank Lloyd Wright, who was its architect, using new materials, making curved walls instead of straight walls. It created a real stir. Probably created a stir more than Museum of Modern Art, because the architecture was so weird, and and New Yorkers were not used to it. So, but the reason they did it was because it complemented non-objective abstract art. That was mostly what Guggenheim was interested in, which is very different from the so-called modern art of the Museum of Modern Art. Sometimes we tend to think of modern art as coming from kind of a homogeneous pot, but there's really big differences in there. And anyways,
well, I'm going to go back to the music thing real quick, because of the timing of this. The Guggenheim's timing was really about the time when kids would have been going to that museum on a school trip, that era.
Yeah.
And so some of them would have been 10 years old to 20 years old. And so these very formative years, right?
Rock and roll.
So and that was what was happening at that point. People were just open. I think something happened where we took this magic pill. No, we didn't, but you know what I mean? And we started to open up our creative horizons as Americans in this country. You know what I mean? That there was this American, I know there's impressionism and everything, but this was like almost after that, like a new wave of saying, okay, we're tired with that now. Not necessarily tired, but like we're moving on to something new, and it may scare the heck out of you all, just like rock and roll did when people were listening to two-step music, you know. I'm going to get in trouble.
Yeah. I didn't talk about this in the article, but one of the other things that was World War II was the years after World War II, where people were getting back into not first normalcy and then a smattering of the ability to buy more stuff, and more stuff was available. And and there was a greater freedom, like you say. Rock and roll came in. It wouldn't have come in maybe without having people having been through the war. I don't know, because one thing leads to another. One thing, sometimes there's reactions, and sometimes there's, so it's hard to get a global overview of what's happened without looking at everything. And
that's why you have a 3-part series. because it is a lot. I mean, this is like becoming cultured America in a way, right? Of starting to learn. And the Cabinet of Curiosities, by the way, Glenn Burrows says hi. I interviewed him about Historic Libraries of England after you. And I said, Glenn, we were just talking about the Cabinet of Curiosities and his beautiful Norfolk English accent. He goes, oh, the Cabinet of Curiosities. And I'm like, oh, I love this. He has to do the voice for it. Like, we should have a magic show with the Cabinet of Curiosities, but look at where we've gone now, to like almost an artistic revolution in a way.
Right.
And the museums kept up with it.
And when you look at everything we've talked about this morning, we've touched on a lot of stuff, but at the same time, these museums were being done back probably in the Midwest and other places, maybe in the Northeast, that there were a lot of small towns that for some reason they'd been to the big city. They've seen the museums. They know what they can benefit from. They know what to expect. They're going to be challenged, and they're going to learn something. And so when they would go back to their small towns, they would sort of spread the need that we need to have an art museum in this town, because there's a lot of benefits. And having to go far away, you realize when you come back, you would like to see more of that. So there was a growth of small town art museums in the 50s and into the 60s. It kind of went down for a while because it got easier to travel and go to other art towns. But these small town museums contributed a lot to the communities. Most of them didn't. Some of them had really great art museum objects, because there are some wonderful artists that aren't on the coast. There's artists everywhere.
Grant Wood is one of them. We always talk about him. In the Midwest, Benton.
Right.
I mean, there's the Midwest. I think is like a highway of art. Like when I look at the Jefferson Highway, which goes through a lot of your communities that you've talked about over the years. Goes from Winnipeg to New Orleans. I mean, that's a highway of art, no matter how you look at it. It's like, gosh, the Midwest was doing it, but yet here we've got Guggenheim and all of that kind of thing. So it's, I don't know, but I always thought the Midwest was massive on art, like big on art, big, So who wins in this,
Well, I think anybody who lives in a community with an art museum is winning.
Winning.
I really do. Yeah. But it's hard. We get used to. We read about the big museums. There's always a lot of press, a positive press for big museums. So we tend to not think about small town museums. I remember the museum I accidentally went to. I was being snobbish, thinking in a small town art museum wouldn't have a lot. So I was on a vacation and I was in Utah, and I went through a little town, Springerville, I think, or Springville, and there's a sign that said art museum. Turn here. Well, I didn't do it. I went on and had my vacation, and then I was getting kind of bored on my vacation, so I said, well, let's go to that museum. Well, I'm so sorry that I hadn't made it first on my list, because it was the most fabulous experience. The art was fabulous. It struck me And I found out later about how it was formed, which was even more fabulous. And I better not go into it. It's probably take too long. But
That's
at
cool,
any rate,
though.
after that, I don't discount ever
Yeah,
going
yeah.
to
Yeah, don't judge
to a
a
small
book by
town
its
art museum.
cover. Yeah, don't judge a museum by the
Yeah,
community either, because you don't know. Like Grant Wood, you'd be driving around the Midwest through farmlands, right? Hay fields and all of that, not knowing that they've created that highway. Remember, we did that story. And,
right,
he's the
right,
American Gothic famous dude. So look up American Gothic, Grant Wood. But they've done some really cool things, and it made the town celebrate creativity too, which is what I really love about it, is when you start to create something and let people know, like our tiny town has Grant Wood. That's a big deal. I mean, his art went all over Chicago.
right,
We talked about that, but
right.
it's such a doesn't really matter the size. Sometimes it's a story. Um, the art museums. I remember the one in El Cajon, Weghorst. What do you remember that museum? It's like a
Wig,
Southwest art
wait,
museum.
wait,
Weghorst.
Wighorst.
There it
Louis
is.
Wighorst.
Thank you.
Yeah,
You always save me with names. Yeah. And that museum, I remember being like, oh, this is some of the real stuff. This is the real deal. Because I was so new at Southwest when we, started Southwest Blend
sure.
as a magazine and all of that. And then a lot of the shop owners were the people who taught me about Native American art, about what was genuine, what was not. And like, you have to really know your stuff, actually. And I remember
Yes.
going to that museum on my own, and I was just like, I wanted to go back and go back again, because sometimes you're just not done looking, you know,
Yeah.
um,
Right.
like that lady we told you about in George, is it St. George or George, in South Africa near Cape Town,
Oh yeah.
um,
Uh huh.
with the fairy artist. Remember who does that little
Right.
teeny brush
Right. Yes.
painting
Yep.
of multiple fairies in a square inch, that you're going like, what are you taking, lady? How are you doing that? But that is a treasure. That, to me, that
Yeah.
museum that we went to, it's not a gallery, they're not selling, it's a museum. And that has changed my perception of what you can create. Don't
Yeah.
ever think what you, just go for it, man. Do it. It's inspiring, all of this to me.
Well.
So, yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, ooh, I'm excited about our next one too. We're going to be
Yeah.
talking about
We're.
recent museums. So we're going new now.
Yes.
Hmm,
Yeah.
cool.
So I think we better stop here. Because what we've talked about is, I mean, we've been here an hour probably. It's a lot to digest,
Hmm.
because to think about the changes and what happened and why they happened. And so
Hmm.
when I was doing this research, I thought I've got to divide it into sections. So I hope people go back and read the first section or listen,
Yes.
and
Yeah. See all
I'm
three.
getting yeah, yeah, because it gives you a really good picture of how we are in the United States from an art museum standpoint. And we're still working on new museums. So I think you'll find the next part really interesting, because the architecture really changes.
Yeah. And the way of storytelling changes, you know,
Right.
and getting the information in the museum is completely, I mean, it's going wild, man. It is. It's like a Disneyland experience, depending on where and how. But I'm excited
Yes.
about that. And all three parts will always be, linked together once they're all complete. And, we'll put it into a special publication. We will. But I also want to give everyone, the link to the website for the museum in Silver City, New Mexico. Go to southwest-art-museum.org. Again, linked in the episode notes, and Victoria's article, from last month is up there too. And yeah, we're all good. It's always good to keep up with Victoria. Go to victoriachick.com. Thank you, Victoria. Man, that's a lot of rabbit
Oh,
holes, but I'm ready. Let's go.
thank you. Yeah, there's rabbit holes galore. So that's
Well,
what makes
yeah,
it
it's
interesting.
Easter season, everybody. So, next month will be even extra special.
Okay.
Thank you for listening to Big Blend Radio. You can view Victoria Chick's artwork at victoriachick.com. Keep up with us at bigblendradio.com.